Imagine an under 2-hour movie in which you depict the origins, initial transmission, global spread, catastrophic consequences, as well as the discovery and production of a vaccine for a highly contagious virus infecting millions of people all over the world. Throw in adultery, food shortages, civil unrest, cities under lockdown, on-screen explanations of such concepts as the R-naught and contact tracing, a teen romance, and an internet-enabled blogger slinging dangerous ideas to millions of followers about fake news, government cover-ups, and a bogus cure through which he profiteers off of people's desperation. Cast any stars you want, since you are Steven Soderbergh and you have a huge budget. If what you're imagining is the film Contagion, which came out in 2011 and has gotten a lot of attention in the past few months, then you were imagining the right thing. Contagion is a scientific and medical thriller about a hypothetical global pandemic. And while I cannot speak to the finer points of the scientific credulity of the film, I'll leave that to the scientists, and plenty of these discussions have been had, I do know that the filmmakers took the science very seriously. The chief scientific consultant on the film, Dr. Ian Lipkin, is the head of epidemiology at Columbia University's Center for Infection and Immunity, and he based the fictional virus on an existing virus, so this is not just made-up science fiction. Lipkin explained that he participated in the making of Contagion because the filmmakers were really committed to accurately representing the science and to making a movie that would entertain as well as educate. And if that sounds familiar, that is absolutely the approach used in Thomas Edison's Temple of Moloch back in the 19-teens. So this was really an opportunity for the doctor to use the platform of a big-budget Hollywood film to sound a wake-up call about virus-related risks from things like increased international travel and population growth. What the film does is to imagine the spread of this highly contagious, very deadly, fast-acting virus, beginning on a business trip in Hong Kong and spreading as characters leave and return home to cities around the globe. It draws our attention to a specific narrative thread involving Gwyneth Paltrow's return to her home and to her family in Minneapolis. What Contagion basically does is to show us the life story of a virus. The virus is kind of the antagonist, as it unfolds in condensed movie time. Although people die, often horribly, in this film, including one of the main characters, played by Matt Damon, who has a young son. His young son dies. Should also remind you of Temple of Moloch. The death of a child is often used in film this way to emotionally manipulate the audience. Contagion is ultimately a film about faith in science. The CDC, the World Health Organization, and even Sanjay Gupta are all working together to discover how the virus works and to produce a vaccine or to provide public health information that's science-based. Now, because it is a fictional film, it has an arsenal of storytelling devices at its disposal. And if you take a class like Introduction to Film, you'll learn about things like film form, how a film is put together. And this is what I want to turn to for just a minute. During the search for the index patient, Soderbergh uses the idea of surveillance footage from a Hong Kong casino as a way to show the audience how the disease is spread.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Excuse me. Oh my God. Thank you.
Emhoff gave it to the Ukrainian.
That just shows contact. Maybe he went the other way. What about Leifai? He was on the casino floor.
Watch this.
Oh, that's good. Okay, come on, let's go together. Ready?
That's good.
That's him, with Emhoff at 12:08. I can show you the Ukrainian woman on the security camera in the elevator, going back to her room 20 minutes earlier.
Now, this is a pretty clever way to provide basically a flashback for the audience. What happened in the past viewed in the context of the present drama of learning about how the virus is spread. Basically, we, the audience, are looking at it alongside the investigators, right? And that's partly what is so satisfying about this film, is that there is a detective story quality exemplified by scenes like this. It's kind of a whodunit of virus transmission, and we're along for the ride. We're basically learning a lesson from the character in this scene played by Marion Cotillard about being a careful observer, a careful reader of images. What we are supposed to be watching are recordings from surveillance cameras. Now, What a surveillance camera looks like is typically a fixed position camera looking at a scene from a distant perspective. But what the film shows us is much more targeted than that. It's kind of a virus cam. But this is the beauty of filmmaking, right? The filmmaker is switching these media, and he goes from this like cam that gives us close-ups on what's being touched in the casino, and then he cuts back to images that are clearly supposed to be from a surveillance camera. Of course, it's all from the same cameras, right? Another thing I find interesting about this scene is the way that it emphasizes the spread of the virus through fomites, a word I didn't know anything about until COVID. Fomites meaning objects that are touched that spread the disease, as opposed to being airborne. And what I find interesting about that is that it solves that old invisibility problem that we talked about with Temple of Moloch and tuberculosis in the 19-teens. How do you show people that which you can't see? And of course, Contagion has plenty of coughing too, that old tell that something is wrong. Now, Contagion is not a documentary. It is not an educational film, and it definitely has what I like to call its movie moments. For example, when the lead researcher gives herself a shot of the trial vaccine and then exposes herself to the virus by visiting her dad in the hospital and taking off her mask. This is clearly done in the service of the story. It helps expedite the vaccine development and unrealistically rapid production of the vaccine. But it also shows us things that are impossible to have footage of in the real world. And a perfect example of this, maybe my favorite, happens in the very last scene of the film, in which Soderbergh reveals the origin of the virus. So we see the bat transferring it to the pig, that then ends up with a chef in a restaurant, to Gwyneth Paltrow, and so on. Of course, the origins of a disease we will never see the way they are shown to us in Contagion. Scientists are working on where COVID-19 came from, but we'll never get to see the image of the moment it happened. So this is another thing that the film can do that doesn't happen in real life. Now, fictional movies are really good at making us have emotional reactions. That's what characters are for. And Contagion depicts something that I suspect may be close to home for all of you. And that's a scene in which Matt Damon, who has lost his wife and young son early in the film, has a daughter who he's very protective of during the pandemic. And she's missing her senior year of high school. She's missing her friends. She's missing her boyfriend. Her dad is very strict about the quarantine of the family. And there's a very sweet scene towards the end of the film in which her dad throws her basically a living room prom, of course after her boyfriend gets the vaccine. And it's a very human moment in this film that's otherwise very focused on science and on the discovery of the vaccine. And it's basically the idea that life goes on even if it's not the same. And if you look at the images of the two of them at prom, it could be from a teen romance film, not from a virus thriller. And so the film is really good at weaving us between the human story and then the story of science. Now, when I've told people that I've been watching Contagion again, many people have said, I could not watch that now, it's too scary. How could you watch that now? Doesn't it horrify you? And that's an interesting question, because to me, it's not scary at all compared to what's happening in the real world with COVID. It's fiction, it's a movie. What we see happening in the real world is much more horrifying than what Steven Soderbergh can do in his fictional imagination, even if it does have some parallels to what's happening today. And especially since the film ends with a very happy note, which is the distribution of a vaccine. The most satisfying thing about watching Contagion now is that it concludes with hope. It makes us feel better to see that the scientists can save us, even if it's in the context of a fictional virus. But I will say that it's really different to watch this film than when I saw it a decade ago, before I was living a version of it. Now let's turn to the present moment and to the actual virus that is impacting all of our lives so tremendously. Remember that character I mentioned in Contagion who used the internet to stir people up about the media, the government, vaccines, and science? Well, keep that character in mind as we have this conversation about a 26-minute video that was recently released called Plandemic. This was just released in May 2020. And by released, I mean put on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Vimeo. Modes of production, distribution, and exhibition are radically different now than they were 10, 20 years ago, certainly 100 years ago. Anyone can make media of a relatively high quality. What you have on your computers or what you have access to through NC State libraries puts you in the league of making really high quality videos without much expense. According to the Los Angeles Times, Plandemic cost $2,000 to produce, okay, which is nothing compared to a regular Hollywood production, for example. Also, in terms of modes of distribution and exhibition, anyone can put anything on YouTube. It's just a matter of will people look at it or not, right? It used to be that there were gatekeepers. You had to go through a distribution company in order to get in a movie theater, and those days are just gone. What basically happened was that a right-wing conspiracy group, QAnon, posted it, and their members reposted it to Facebook, Twitter, and so on, and it went viral. And you know what I mean by that now, right? Which is that it very quickly infiltrated audiences, and many, many people saw it very quickly. According to the New York Times, there were 8 million views of Plandemic just a week after it was posted. All of the aforementioned exhibition platforms, such as Facebook and Twitter, took the video down because of their policies about using their platforms to disseminate misinformation. Now, I have no idea who viewed it and what their intentions were in viewing it, what their reactions were. I was a few of those views, okay? But I watched it in an unusual place. It was off all of those platforms. I had to see it at a firearms activist website, which is not a place I usually go to view media. It is no longer even on the director's website. I have no idea why. What I'm not interested in doing is debunking the copious misleading claims made in the video, because there are plenty of scientists who are better qualified than I to dismantle the video claim by claim, and they have done so. Very easy to find these articles debunking the film. What I'm interested in thinking about what it's doing as a media artifact. So it presents itself as a documentary, conveying a credible truth. I like to turn to my friend the Oxford English Dictionary to look things up when I'm giving a presentation like this, and their definition takes us back to the root of the word, which is in the idea of the document, meaning evidence. And the primary function of a documentary is to record or to inform. Okay, two of those purposes of early cinema. As you will learn in your coursework at NC State, doing research and citing reputable sources is essential for making and supporting any kind of claim. Plandemic does not bother with this convention at all. And I find some of the ways in which it does not do that worth mentioning and thinking about. So when you are watching a documentary trying to convince an audience about serious issues, you expect a few things. One of the things is interviews with an array of identified experts in the field. In Plandemic, the lone voice of authority identified in the video is Dr. Judy Mikovits, who essentially functions as the narrator in the film. The second voice identified in the film is the filmmaker/father. I'm not sure why he appended the father to that description, but that's how he identifies himself on screen. And in this role, he asks questions, he offers commentary, and he appears in reverse shots looking sympathetic to all of the doctor's claims. There is no mistaking that the filmmaker supports all of the allegations being made by the doctor. Now, the filmmaker also frames his narrator and himself as brave, heroic figures, speaking truth that has been suppressed. And he really creates this underdog or whistleblower narrative to compel the audience to identify with Dr. Mikovits. There are no other voices that are identified in the film. There's 3 doctors, and I put that in quotes because they're not named, they're not identified on the screen, and their names and affiliations are almost impossible to read because they're either off screen or they're blurred on their scrubs. So the strategy used in Plandemic is basically a kind of shock and awe strategy. For 26 minutes, there are so many claims and accusations made, it's hard to even keep track of them. And these are all categorized by the filmmaker under a broad umbrella, this is his term, of the plague of corruption, okay? These claims include the persecution of the doctor, who is the main narrator, conspiracy claims about the Department of Health and Human Services, about someone you know very well at this point, likely, Anthony Fauci, against the CDC, Bill Gates, Medicare, AIDS, Ebola, Big Pharma, and so on. Plandemic also makes claims about COVID, that it was lab-made and released, that influenza vaccines predispose people to it, that there's been a deliberate withholding of hydroxychloroquine in order for interested parties to profit off of future COVID vaccines, that hand washing and sheltering at home cripple your immune system, that mask wearing, this is a quote from the film, literally activates your own virus, from the doctor, by the way, that ocean water has healing powers, and it goes on. I think what the filmmaker is doing here is relying on the audience being overwhelmed with the array of accusations that roll out from a narrator who seems pretty calm and collected. There's no meaningful attempt, however, to support any of the claims. And because it does all of this in the guise of a documentary, And because it is making a lot of claims that attempt to undermine prevailing scientific knowledge and counter public health recommendations, that is what makes it dangerous. In this case, disinformation has real risks. And if you think back to Falling Leaves, this is a very innocent version of this, right? This is a fictional film that's just using disease in terms of the plot or story. In this case, this is presenting itself as basically advice and recommendation to the audience. The filmmaker at one point asked the doctor why she's risking her life to share what she knows now. And she says, because if we don't stop them, just an aside, never says who them is, now we can not only forget our republic and our freedom, but we can forget humanity because we'll be killed by this agenda. That's a pretty serious scare tactic. Now, I don't look at Plandemic as a documentary about any of those claims I mentioned above. I look at it as a tremendously interesting media artifact of the spring of 2020. A documentary of this historical moment and of conspiratorial anti-science thinking. And it is a reminder of why it is important to think deeply and carefully about the media you consume. So Plandemic is kind of a downer note to end on, so I wanted to spend my final moments with you thinking about fictional COVID-19 movies of the future. Now, film production has basically been frozen since the start of this pandemic, although I know the screenwriters must be hard at work. I can guarantee you that there's some COVID-19 screenplays being written at exactly this moment. So let's think for a minute about what COVID-themed movies will be like. Will they be thrillers, like Contagion? Comedies? Horror films? Romances? Dramas? Will they be musicals? That may sound crazy, but there's a Taiwanese musical about a mysterious plague from 1998 called The Hole, and it's wonderful. What are the stories that they will tell? Will they be about time spent in isolation? Will they be about researchers trying to find a vaccine? Hospitals in hot zones? People getting stranded in a foreign country? People losing loved ones? Students not being able to attend high school or college graduations? Where will they be set? In nursing homes? Hospitals? On college campuses? On farms? In meat processing plants? In the Bronx? In Wuhan? In London? Or maybe in Raleigh, North Carolina? Who will the main characters be? Patients? Scientists? Open-up protesters? Politicians? Amazon delivery people? ER doctors? Since you are the ones living through this, maybe you're the ones to tell this story.